All right. Well, we are. I was telling Desmond I'm going to ask for a little grace tonight. The I'm in Omaha and I left my copy of my translation back in Austin. So
Oh, no worries.
I'm gonna be riding blind off of my outline in memory a little bit. The it's always remarkable to me how different this has come up a few times for me in the last week, how different translations are and how what we receive from a text is so contingent on what translation we happen to be reading. Because I tried to look at the Longfellow. Dad, I know at one point you had mentioned it would be really interesting to see how Eslin's version paralleled or deviated from the Longfellow version. So I downloaded the Longfellow version because I don't have mine, and it's so hard to triangulate my text from the outline to Longfellow's. I can do it; it just takes forever. Um, and also, the version I'm looking at doesn't number the lines either. So it's like, all right, I'm just gonna have to wing it based off the outline. Um, and so that's what we're gonna do. I'm gonna ask. I know, Desmond, what version are you reading, or what version have you been looking at?
The one you had,
Oh, the
Anthony.
Anthony Eslin one. Nice.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I also tried to find it on Kindle, and it's for some reason Paradise by Eslin is on Kindle, but not the Inferno. Anyway, digress. So I'm gonna ask. This one's gonna be a little more group participation. I'm gonna ask you guys to read the sections when we come to them, and we're only covering four cantos here: 31, 32, 33, 34. So we can spend a little bit more time. And I actually think this last section lends itself to more of a group discussion anyway. Um, and so this one's gonna be a little slightly different than all the rest of the classes. Um, so yeah, we'll jump right in. So if you remember where we left off last time, in Canto 30, yeah, 30. Um, so we had ended when he sees the um Dante is like Lee like looks back into hell, and then Virgil gets upset with Dante. He's like, "You keep looking over there, and I'll have to pick a fight with you." That's what Virgil tells Dante at the end of Canto 30, and that shames Dante. This is back to lines 131 and 134 and 30. Um, Virgil says to Dante, "You keep looking over there, and in a while I'll pick a fight with you." And when I heard the anger in his voice, now this is Dante talking. When Dante heard the anger in Virgil's voice, I turned with such embarrassment and shame, it haunts my memory still. So that's where we left off in Canto 30. And then we jump right into Canto 31. And I just think this is very fascinating. Whenever there are ancient artifacts mentioned, it's just that always is fascinating to me. So when we jump into 31, they enter into the ninth circle. So they move out of the eighth circle, they move into the ninth circle. Ninth circle is also known as Cocytus. And this is where we're going to find all of the traitors. So that if this is the final circle, and what they find here is people stuck in ice, which we'll talk more about in a little bit. But the first part I want to read, the very first section of 31, after we left 30, Dante's just been wounded and shamed and embarrassed. But then we pick up 31 in lines 1 through 7. Um, Jill, do you want to read that?
Sure. The very tongue that stung me with rebuke, that I flushed with shame in either cheek, then brought the medicine to soothe the shame. As I have heard the lance of Peleus and the son of
Peleus.
Peleus and
Yeah.
his son Achilles used to give wounds with the first touch, healing with the next. We turned our back upon the wretched pit with no more conversation as we crossed upon the inner ridge and that circles it.
Okay. We'll stop there. So this I think is just it's a very interesting image. This lance of Peleus, which stings and then heals. And it's such an accurate description of correction and instruction. I think one of the things as human beings, and this is sort of stepping outside the Inferno, one of the things that I struggle with, and I think Shanoa can attest to this. Sorry for calling you out. Shanoa, is it's like a lot of times when we get feedback, like when I receive feedback, it stings. And so we have this initial reaction to it, and it hurts. It's uncomfortable. And so there is this question of like, sometimes though, those things that wound at first touch, they heal with the next. And that's not always the case. That's not to say we have just free license to critique and tell people what they're doing wrong all the time. Of course, that isn't true. But there is also an element of critiques and advice that is done out of love because it brings healing with the next or correction. And so I would be curious honestly, from a parental point of view, mom and dad, like raising kids, how do you seek to thread that needle of being supportive but also corrective in the way where like knowing that like the lance of Peleus, it's going to sting. Certain correction will sting, but it will bring healing next. So like how do you even think about that?
You going first, Mike?
Well, first of all, you have to understand that you have to do it, because without doing it, you actually, I think, are not doing him any favors. And I think it's actually more loving to that child to correct them, not in a way that is, I don't know what the word is, but just because you can, but because the purpose is to make them a better person, because ultimately you want your child to grow up to be a God-fearing, um, good citizen of the earth, of the United States. And so, difficult though it may be, I think, it's probably, honestly, for me, it was easier to do it with children than it would be like for people that you supervise at work or
Spouse.
I think just because you have, I don't know, for me, I just have more of a vested interest in making sure that they grow up right. And I think sometimes for coworkers and or even friends, it's a little more difficult because you don't want to hurt their feelings, and you're trying to thread that needle of being a good friend, and but still providing with them with feedback that can make them better as well. So,
Got anything to
hey,
add,
Mama.
Mom?
No, other than it's hard, and you can probably speak more to it than whether it's hard to say something because I have evidence here. Like, if I screwed up, you can tell me over all the times I did, right? And I always tell people that you seem to turn out, in spite of my best efforts to ruin you, somehow you manage to come through it all. But it is hard. I think maybe for a mom it's different. I mean, you just really do, like Mike said, want to be. I mean, it's a weighty responsibility, right? You created this person, and now you are responsible for molding and shaping and trying to help them navigate a world that isn't always friendly, right? Um, Inferno shows us the darkness of the world, but it also shows us what can happen if you're the light, hopefully in Paradiso and on. But yeah, it's hard. It's gut wrenching. It's weighty. But you just know that if you don't do it, that your child will suffer. And so as a parent, sometimes you have to do that. And the side you don't see is when you are tough and you're strong in the face of your child, and then you go in the other room and you cry tears of sorrow for your child. So
Yeah. Yeah. Marissa, to catch you up to speed, we're just hop right into 31. We're talking about the first 7 lines when Dante references the lance of Peleus, which wounds with the first blow and heals with the second. And so we're talking about that in the context of giving feedback to my parents were giving their reflections on how to give correction that heals to children. I'm gonna ask you, Marissa, how you go about giving feedback to your significant other.
Oh.
I would say carefully and always coming from a place of love would be my answer. Just, yeah, I mean, it's feedback. You don't want to like bash that person. You're just trying to communicate with that person. So just make sure it's coming from a place of love and not like resentment or like buildup of things that are aggravating you or something like that.
How do you receive it?
Also, hopefully with grace, with open ears, also knowing that it's probably from a place of love and this is something, you know, that obviously that bothers them and it bothers them enough for them to share it with me. So just try to be open and open ears and see what else I can correct.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's hard. I fail at this a lot. Shanola can attest. I'm poor. I'm bad at this. Yet to find the right balance. But I'm working, okay? I'm working. So honestly, there's not really much I wanted to touch on in 31. The only other thing I'll mention, just because it's interesting to me. So one of the things I see in 31, as they enter this final circle of hell, is around the rim they find giants punished. So Nimrod and I don't even know how you say that one, Phioletes, but they see giants. And so this just reminds me of at the end of my outline, I have in the appendix B. There are the in Greek mythology. There are the Titans, and so the Titans were the ones that rebelled against Zeus and the Olympians, and for that rebellion, they are thrown into Tartarus. Now, like if you're familiar with the Bible, actually in the original Hebrew, it makes distinctions, but in a lot of modern translations just translate it all as hell is the same thing. But the Bible actually makes distinctions between like Hades and Tartarus, and Sheol. So it's got different names in the Bible. And when it comes to where Satan goes, it's Tartarus. That version is where Satan ends up. So there's a direct parallel to where the Titans end up in Greek mythology for their rebellion against the Olympians. So that's I just bring that up because when we see the Titans sort of in the around the rim of Circle 9, that's one of the things probably in Dante's imagination that's happening, and he's making that association between the rebellious Titans and rebellious Satan, sort of as part of that. Moving into Canto 32. So this is where they cross the frozen river, Cocytus, and Cocytus is the river where everybody's. And so they see some people their feet are in the air, some with their heads in the air. They're in like all these different positions, but they're all frozen. And so what we find out in this one is that the lowest in the Inferno are frozen. We'll talk a little bit more about this when we get to Satan. A lot of people, when they come to this part of the Inferno, are surprised. Marissa, who we got there? Who is that? Who's our seventh student? We got 8 students. We got Ben joining us, and then Marissa's cat.
He's Perseus.
Perseus! Oh, perfect.
But I call him Butterman.
Oh, well.
It scared me for a second. I thought it was a demon because I saw like this tail going. I was like, oh no.
Do you tell him he missed the Canto when we talked about Medusa? That was a couple classes ago. Yes.
Oh yeah, no. He's hungry.
What we find in this lowest portion of hell is ice. Not commonly when we think about hell now in the popular imagination, we see it burning. I mean, there's flames, but Dante sees it as ice. Now, if this makes sense actually in the context of what we've been talking about through the whole Inferno in terms of seeing hell as an inversion of paradise. So if the creative fire is sort of everlasting and always bringing forth new things and creating this idea of ice as stagnant. There is no movement. There is no motion. So that's part of what is happening by Dante putting them in ice. And so there's also this medieval association at play here where so God, the creative fire, gives light, gives warmth, constantly creates, and it's sort of that is also going back to Greek mythology. Prometheus is one of the Titans. Prometheus steals the fire from Olympus, and then that's what he gets punished for, is stealing fire. That's like the logos. But again, even the Greeks, so both Greek and early Christianity and then medieval sort of associated the divine with fire. So that's what we see the opposite of here in Canto 32. So I'm going to have Dad, do you want to read Canto or lines? Let's go 20 through 24. If that doesn't make sense, 22 through 24 is what I want you to read. A couple lines before and after that, to the extent it makes sense, I think start there.
I'm going to start with 19.
Okay.
And go through what? 24, you said?
At least 24, yeah.
Okay. So starting at line 19. I heard a voice cry out, watch where you step. Go on, but do not tread upon the heads of the exhausted brothers, spirits damned. At that I turned and saw before my feet a lake of ice, which in the terrible cold looked not like frozen water, but like glass.
All right, so that's a strange thing. Why would it look like glass and not frozen water?
So they could be reflecting on themselves. I don't know.
I don't know that this is the right answer, but I have something that I think. Mom, you're close to what I think. I'm not saying I'm right, but Desmond.
Sorry. I was thinking, is it because it's just the super negative of like not just cold, but like so cold that it's like glass, like a gigantic ice cube, as opposed to water frozen over.
Yeah, I mean, could be. I don't know. It's like I honestly don't know to what extent they had. I think they had like glass mirrors in medieval times, like in Dante's time, right?
Yeah.
And so for me, if you think about the glass this way, what do they see reflected in the glass? It's upward. And so there is this idea that in hell, you carry a memory of heaven, but you are frozen in ice. And so you carry this memory, but can make no movement toward it. And so that is like the deepest pit of despair, is carrying the memory of heaven, knowing you can do nothing to sort of get yourself any closer or approach the light. And so to me, I think when he uses the words "but like glass," that's what I see. We'll see that a little bit. We'll talk about this more in Satan. But I think that's part of what's at play here. Is there's in each of the souls in the bottom of hell, there is this memory of what's highest that they still hold in them, and that's what creates the most suffering. Because if that was removed from their mind, they wouldn't be suffering, right? It's what they have lost and can never regain that causes them to truly suffer. So that's just my theory there. Now the one that's interesting to me, I guess another question. So one of the themes that we've been following throughout the Inferno is the idea of the poetic justice of Dante's punishments, how what people did in life, they become in death. This one seems, the ninth circle seems a little different to me, but maybe not. Maybe there's some correction here. So In the ninth circle, we see all of the traitors. So we see most famous one we're gonna see is Judas, obviously one that betrayed Jesus. And so there are a couple different types of traitors that we see in the ninth circle, but the general way of describing them is they're different than the wrathful because they did something worse than repaying evil for evil. What these people did is they repaid good with evil. So that's part of what makes them traitors. You can say that about Satan. You can say it about Judas. Now, if we think about all this in the context of, okay, all of the punishments in Dante's Inferno are some sort of poetic justice. Why would he put traitors, people that repaid good with evil, in ice? Because we talked about it. It makes sense in the context of the ultimate suffering is intuiting heaven and not being able to move toward it. That makes sense. But in the context of why is this poetic justice? Like what about being a traitor in life would make you put in ice and death? And this is I open this to you guys because I'm not sure I have the answer to this. And maybe it's just the fact that this breaks the rule of the rest of Dante's Inferno. Or maybe we have to wait until we get to Satan because it does show up a little bit in Satan. But Desmond, you have a theory?
Yeah, I was thinking maybe because of just positive and negative energy. If it's like that cold, it's like the complete furthest away from the light or the positive energy. So since the betrayal is something so negative, they would be sent to that furthest negative way place. Maybe. I'm just guessing.
No, yeah. I mean, that's like, I guess if we go back to something we talked about in one of the earlier classes in terms of Dante is a student of Aristotle. Aristotle's sentiment that man is a political animal. It can only flourish in the context of community and society. And sort of structuring punishments in the way that to the extent people subvert what's necessary for a flourishing society, that is a sin in a sense, because if man is made for one another, anything that goes against that or does not promote that, Dante sort of sees as a sin. And so I think you're right in the sense that if we view fire as sort of like the divine and giving warmth generally, then we could see what the traitors did in life is it's a snuffing out of the flame, effectively, I think, is how we can see that. It's like they were given this gift, and they have this share of something that they were given, that brings warmth and light. And what they chose to do with that good that they got is they totally they didn't even just wait. They did something worse than wasted. They like threw water on it. It's hard to sort of articulate exactly what's going on. But I think you're right in the sense that it has to just be that they took this gift of warmth and light and they threw it away. Not only threw it away, they betrayed it. I don't know what other synonym for betray there is, but I think that's as good a sense of any. Yes, Dad. See you raise your
Could
hand.
it also be that the ice keeps them stuck in their sin, supposedly, that they can't, sometimes when you do something because it talks about shame, you can go and make it right. Well, they can't ever make it right because they're stuck in ice. And even that, I think that one place where it talked about even Satan, trying to get out of the ice by flapping his wings, actually was doing one of the worst things they could do, because the flapping of the wings made the ice even much colder, kept him stuck even more so, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm just here. Oh, sorry. You want to say something, Noel?
No.
Oh, well, I was
Yeah,
just gonna
can you lower your hand, please?
lower your hand. I didn't know that was a thing. I'm new to the Zoom. No, you have a little hand on your screen. That puts you first. I got to get that trick. Well, I just had a couple notes on the traitors specifically. I think earlier in 31, that was where the comment "Don't tread on me" came out. Talked about traitors with whom there can be no brotherhood because they're traitors. So they've lost all sense of that just by being traitors. And it talked about how the sin is just so ugly, and they're so hardened, to do what you said earlier, doing evil from love, or I forget how you said that, but I mean that takes a hard heart, right? To use somebody and be a traitor when you're supposed to love them. So that, I mean, you cut yourself off from all hope, from all connection to anybody. And so it definitely is a hardening in the ice, cutting people off. There
Yeah,
can
that's a
be,
good point. The hardening of the heart that happened in life is what encases them in death.
yeah.
Desmond.
Yeah, and also I was thinking just because like ice isn't really something that's cold. Ice is, or it's more like it's just like the positive energy is leaving whatever that is. So like if you put ice against your skin, you're not really getting cold. You're just feeling the heat leaving your body because it's sucking it. So if something's in ice, it means it has absolutely no positive energy at all. So it's just like the absence of that. Um,
Yeah, I guess
thing.
that's it's kind of operates the sim like darkness is just the absence of light, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like if we go to space, the temperature is like it's very cold. But that's just because it doesn't have warmth. Like it doesn't. That's always been interesting to me though, right? Because there are parts of space, not that I want to go down this rabbit hole, but like there are parts of space that are closer to the sun. So I don't really understand what's happening, but uh, we don't need to talk about that right now. Uh, but that good observation nonetheless. So let's move on into Canto 33. And so in the second zone of the ninth circle is where we find the betrayers of sort of the nations or parties or political affiliation. So this is where there's a little bit of Florentine politics at play again, as with in other places of the Inferno. There is an episode here that's a little strange. If I had my book, we would spend a little bit of time on it. There's this man named Count Ugolino that Dante in Virgil encounter, and he takes his revenge by gnawing the brains of this archbishop. It's very strange. It's honestly a very vulgar. When you read this, you think like this is actually you think like this is the darkest part of the Inferno in my view. Because once we get to Satan, there's other things at play. But it's like you see this guy chewing these brains out, and then you hear this story of Count Ugolino, who was imprisoned in life. And then him and his four sons, his sons were thrown into prison with him, and they were forced to starve. And then in the Inferno, we're not really told the fate of Ugolino and his sons, but the implication is that Ugolino ate his sons to not be starved to death. And so it's a very dark scene in the Inferno. I if I had my so I guess maybe Mom, I don't know if you have it like marked where that encounter
Yeah.
is in your book.
Yeah, I
Okay, do you
do.
want to read a little section?
See where it starts. When a weak glint, I'll start at 55 and you can tell me when to stop.
Okay.
When a weak glint of daylight made its way into our prison of sorrow, I saw my own face in the four that looked at me. I bit both hands for grief, and they, who thought I must be longing for some food to eat, suddenly rose and came to me and said, "Father, for us it would be much less pain if you ate us instead. You clothed us with this wretched flesh. Now strip it off again." I calmed myself, lest they grow sadder still. That day and all the next we did not speak. Ah, hard earth, why did you not open up? And when we had arrived at the fourth day, my Gatto fell outstretched before my feet, saying, "Papa, why don't you help me?" There he died. As clearly as you see me here, I watched the other three drop, one by one. the 5th and the 6th days. Then I flung myself, already blind, groping upon each one. 2 days I called their names when they were dead. Then hunger did what sorrow could not do. Having said that, he turned his eyes askance and took the wretched skull between his teeth, tough as a dog that gnaws down to the bone. Ah, Pisa, vile disgrace of all the folk in the sweet land where he is uttered. Since your neighbor towns are slow to punish you, may the isles of Capria and Gorgona uproot themselves to plug the Arno's mouth, that everyone who dwells in you may drown. For if Count Ugolini suffered blame, Ugolino suffered blame having betrayed you of your fortresses, you, for your part, should not have nailed his sons to such a cross. O Thebes, renewed and young, their tender age made them innocent. Brigada, Hugh, and the other two my song remembers here. We passed on where the ice swaddles another clan in its coarse wrath, their heads not bowed, but all turned up and back.
Yeah, so we'll end there. But that's a pretty gruesome visual of what's happening here. Admittedly, I don't know enough about Florentine politics, but what we do gather from this is that you have Count Ugolino and then you have this Archbishop Ruggieri. And Dante seems to think that both of them deserve to be in this circle among the traitors for betraying sort of, I don't know if it's Florence or sort of the faith or what exactly, but we know that Archbishop Ruggieri is the one who threw Ugolino and his 4 sons in prison. And so that line that my mom just read about, it's something like you find yourself here for nailing his 4 sons to that cross. And so I think the reason Archbishop ends up there is because he didn't just take out justice on Ugolino, he threw his 4 sons for the sins of the father in with him. So it's this really like gut-wrenching scene that we read in 33. And then what we find sort of toward the end of 33 is another. I want to spend a little bit of time on this too, because I think it is something worth thinking about and grappling with. So if we go to line 124 to 132, Desmond, do you want to read that? You want to read those? It starts with such privilege has this realm of Ptolemaea.
Okay. Such privilege has this realm of Ptolemaea? Is that what you say? Okay, that oftentimes the soul drops down to hell before the fates have cut the thread of life, and that you may with greater will scrape off the tears hardened to glass upon my face. Know that soon as any soul betrays, as I betrayed, his body is snatched away and taken by a demon who controls it until the time arrives for it to die.
Okay, so what's happening here is this is where they meet the souls of people who betrayed their beneficiaries. So this is specifically when we think about Judas. Like, this is also would also be like sort of, I don't know, probably like a Benedict Arnold, or anybody who this would also be somebody if you offered hospitality to a stranger and then they stole from you or they killed you. Like that's the type of person we meet here. And what Dante is saying is he's saying as soon as that sort of betrayal happens, their soul drops down to hell and their body basically becomes an empty shell inhabited by a demon. So their body continues to live inhabited by a demon, but their soul goes and lives in hell. So that's sort of what Dante is poetically illustrating here. Now, I don't know that any of us would agree that that's what actually happens, but I think we can agree that there is a way in which we can die before we die. And so the question I want to put to you all, and this is in my reflection questions, is in what ways can we die before we die? So Dante, I think, is intuiting the right thing, that just because our body is moving doesn't mean we are living. And so I just like Shanoa, I'm gonna ask you to participate here. And just thinking about, like in what ways do you think we can die, our spirit can die before our body is buried?
Hmm. Um, the first thought that comes to mind is like emotionally. I think like that's often I can come from hurt or trauma or things like that. I think sometimes people's emotions just they tap out. And I think that can kind of be associated with that shame sometimes of doing bad things or like just the need to look after yourself. You don't have that guilt anymore. You don't feel quite as much. Sometimes your pain is numbed. So that's what came to my brain.
Marissa?
I don't know, just this, I think the spirit can die. Yeah, I don't know. I feel like people go through things in life and sometimes they can't get themselves out of it. And I don't know. I think sometimes, yeah, their just spirit, their hope can die along with their spirit.
So yeah, I agree. I think where I disagree with Dante here is this concept of finality that he introduces to this. It's because what he says is this is basically in Dante's universe, there's judgment before judgment. So there's no room for repentance. There's no room for redemption. Um, and that's where I sort of take issue with this particular image because I think we see it relatively often in life where you could even happen in the context of if you give up on a dream and you sort of lose that childlike self, you can go through that period, but it can be resurrected again. So it never gets fully and finally snuffed out. I think it can sort of get drawn down into like a smoldering ember, but the flame can never be fully snuffed out until we leave this life. And so, but I think that is one way we see it all the time is in the interest of um, growing up and being productive members of society, and all of these things we think we're supposed to do. I think that claims more casualties um, than a lot of diseases that take physical bodies. To be honest, I think it wreaks more havoc. To me, that's. But again, that's where there's always that hope. There's a hope of sort of while you have breath. There's a doom spiro spiro is Latin for while I breathe, I hope. And so there's always a chance of redemption for as long as you have life left. But the caveat is none of us know how much life we have left. So there is a sense of urgency also sort of attached to it. So let's move on into the final canto, 34, and this is where we meet the infamous Satan or Lucifer. Now, this is I'm not sure I fully have ever wrapped my head around this. Um, the name Lucifer as Lightbringer is such a curious name for the Antichrist. And it's but so it's strange, but this is where I think it's poetic a little bit here because I think Lucifer is his name before the fall. I don't know this, but I think Lucifer, and so there's if we think about Lightbringer, and then we think about the actions of Satan, it's sort of a betrayal of his name, the name he's given by God. And so the ultimate, like in rebelling, is the ultimate act of sort of denying what he was given by God. And so he's meant to be a light bringer, and he ends up being the opposite, sort of in his choice to rebel. I have no idea if that's theologically sound, to be completely honest. But I've always found that fascinating, and it is a I'm sure somebody folks who have thought about this much longer than me have a more coherent view of it. But that's what I think is sort of sitting at the heart of the name Lucifer. Anyway, so we arrive. Yes, Marissa.
Sorry, that just made me think too. I'm like, what if it also means like light bringer? Like as long as Lucifer is, I guess, is that God also is. So like he like as long as Lucifer is there, like God will be there. And so he is the light bringer. Like if Lucifer tries to pull someone to the bad side, like God's there. So he's bringing God. I don't know. I was just thinking about.
Yeah, in like a weird sort of way, he thinks he's winning somebody, but then they slip through the back door to the light. Is that like?
No, more like he brings God. Like if Lucifer, like, I don't know. That's how I'm thinking about it. Like as long as God is there, or as long as Lucifer is there, God is there. Does that make sense to anyone else?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's actually a beautiful thought that, that God will never leave us. God pursues us. He is in pursuit of us. So if Satan's after us, God is going to pursue in order to counteract the darkness. That's what I'm hearing you saying.
Yes, that's what I was trying to say. Thank you.
Yeah, I've never thought about it like that, but certainly as good an explanation as mine. So when the poets finally arrive at the bottom of hell, this is known as Judeca, named obviously after Judas. And so this is continues to be where betrayers of benefactors, or this is where betrayers of benefactors are found and punished. Most of the souls here are completely encased in ice, and then here Virgil and Dante, they see the Satan himself, and he's chewing in his three mouths. He's got three mouths. So what we learn from the three mouths is, why do you think he has three mouths? Actually, I'm gonna pose that question.
Trinity.
Mom, you can't answer.
Oh, sorry.
I know, because I know you listen to the Anthony Eslin commentaries. Desmond.
The Trinity. No, I'm just kidding.
No, it is. That is right.
Smart, Desmond.
That's right.
Okay, and I just heard you say it.
High five, Desmond.
You have to view it all. Like, again, thinking about all this in the context of we are now in the complete inversion of what is highest. So the lowest is the opposite of what is highest in all respects. So everything we see in this scene of Satan and what he's doing is meant to be a depiction of the exact opposite that we would see in God, in Christ, and the Holy Spirit. So that he is the anti-Trinity, the anti-Christ, the anti-Spirit, sort of anti-creation. He's all of those things. He's anti everything that's at the highest. This is like a lot of the poets that I love. So like Mephistopheles is the name of the demon in Goethe's Faust. And he says, I'm the spirit that denies. In Brothers Karamazov, when Ivan has a conversation with the devil, you don't really know if it's right or wrong, or if it's real or imagined. But the devil that he has a conversation with says effectively the same thing. I'm the spirit that doesn't want anything to be created, that actively opposes creation, that unwills what God willed. So there is sort of this attempt at removing the light that God brought. So when God said the force is in motion by saying, "Let there be light." And this is why it's so curious that Lucifer is light bringer. He says, "Let there be light," but then all of the work of Satan is trying to put that genie back in the bottle, and sort of trying to reverse that sort of, in a weird sort of way, he's trying to reverse the light bringing process, even though his name is Lightbringer. But we've already spent enough time talking about the origins of his name. So he's seeing chewing in these three mouths is Judas, Brutus, and Cassius. So Brutus is famous in he's the one that betrayed Caesar. I think Caesar. I might have that wrong. But like the Ides of March. So Brutus is the one that. So this, you have the classical tradition betrayer, and then you have the biblical betrayer. I can't remember who Cassius is, to be honest. I should know that. But I can't remember who he is. And so, but that's who Satan is chewing in his mouth. And then with Dante on his back, Virgil climbs down onto Satan's matted hide, reaches the center of the earth, and wheels about. And then they sort of come back out to see the stars. But when we find at the icy bottom, we see ice. We see Satan sitting in the middle of the sea of ice. And so I want to have somebody read. It's going to be a little bit longer selection, 10 through 24. Mom, will go back to you for those.
Okay, on 10 through 20. All right.
So I want you to emphasize, Mom,
Yeah.
that I know you used to do this growing up. Read this with passion. So that there's one section when it says, "Behold there, dis." So it's like this is when Virgil's leading him, and he's like, you gotta honestly, it's like you have to put yourself in the shoes of Dante when Virgil says, "Behold dis." So this is Virgil. This is Virgil telling Dante, like, this is it. This is the pinnacle of our journey down into the Inferno. This is what it's like. This. Behold it. Soak it in so that you never come back here. So that this is the end of your education. And this is, fingers crossed, the last you'll ever see of this place. And so this is Virgil telling Dante, like, soak it in, look around, see all these souls in ice. Just look at Satan, look at what he's doing. Like, sear this in your memory. So that's sort of what's happening in the context. But Mom, you want to read? 10,
How far do you want me to go to?
10 through 24.
24. All right. With fear, I set these words in verse. It was where the shades are all covered up in ice and clearly seen like wisps of straw and glass. Some souls lie prone and some stand straight. Of those, some have their heads up, others have their souls, and some bend over face to feet like bows. When we'd walked far enough to reach the place where my instructor thought it well to show me the creature who once had the lovely face, he stopped me, stepped away from where I stood, saying, "Behold there, dis, behold, the place where you must arm yourself with fortitude." How faint I then became, how turned to ice. Reader, ask not, I will not write it down, for any words I used would not suffice. I did not die, did not remain alive. Think for yourself, is wisdom buds in you, what I became, deprived of life and death. Did I go too far?
No, that's right. That was perfect. So, pertinent to our discussion a little bit ago, so one thing that we learn about Satan here is the creature who once had a lovely face, which implies now that in his rebellion, his face is now ugly. And so that's one of the ways where he sort of warped, uncreated himself. And it's this idea that he was, again, once made to be a light bringer, and now he is something different entirely. We also see in this depiction of Satan something like Satan is supposed to represent the most frustrated and tormented being in all of hell. One of the going back to the idea of like anti-Christ is what Satan is. The other thing we learn about Satan here is he's enormous. He is huge. Why is he enormous? Because Christ is small. So Christ is small to this is where it passed through sort of the eye of a needle, right? It's that pure spirit. And so what we have is the inversion of that childlike, small, wispy thing that could enter the gate. Is we have this monstrous creature that is, you think about him passing through the eye of a needle. He couldn't. He's huge. He's enormous. And what else is he doing is you see a picture of his wings. His wings are outside of the ice and they're continuously flapping. And so this is part of what keeps all of hell iced over. So this is part of the pride that Satan expressed in his rebellion and continues to express in death. So if you think about the act of flapping his wings, it is this perpetual belief that he can do it on his own, that he has the power to rise up. And it is that pride that precisely keeps him stuck in ice. So this is the distinction again between the Tower of Babel, sort of the attempt to rise up on one's own, versus Jacob's ladder, And that's where, the ladder comes down. So that's another thing we see about Satan. When we see him chewing the three people in his three mouths, we get this sense of somebody that is always hungry but never satiated. If you watch Over the Garden Wall, there's a section in there too in the Cartoon Network series. Same thing. The beasts of the forest consumes. He consumes sort of the life. He's always hungry. And so obviously we've talked about this one already too. But he's flapping his wings with no hope of ever sort of moving in the direction of heaven or being reunited with sort of the maker who made him beautiful. And so in that way, he is the most frustrated, the most tormented being in all of Dante's Inferno. And so that's sort of some of the various things that are going on in the picture of Satan itself. I can't remember, Mom, do you have this marked? I can't remember the exact lines where it describes Satan. I thought I had that in my outline, but I don't.
Yeah, well, let's see here.
Otherwise I can find it.
It's a 3.
It's like
I'm going to
37.
3 with a 6. Yeah, let's see.
It's
I mean,
like
it talks
34.
here like the 3, with him with the 3 faces, but then you want just him specific.
Well, when it talks about, so in the Longfellow version it says, it talks about the 3 people he's eating, but then it says, underneath each came forth 2 mighty wings, such as befitting were so great a bird. Sails of the sea I never saw so large, nor feathers had they, but as of a bat their fashion was, and he was waving them, so that the 3 winds proceeded forth therefrom. Thereby Cocytus wholly was congealed. With 6 eyes did he weep, and down 3 chins trickled the teardrops of bloody dribble. So he's crying. He carries that memory of heaven inside him. At every mouth he with his teeth was crunching, a sinner in the manner of a break, so that he 3 of them tormented thus. To him in front the biting was as naught unto the clawing, for sometimes the spine, utterly stripped of all the skin, remained. The soul up there which has the greatest pain, the master said, is Judas Iscariot. With head inside, he plies his leg without. Of the 2 others who head downward me, the one who hangs from the black jowl is Brutus, so how he rides himself and speaks no word, and the other who so stalwart seems is Cassius. But night reascending is 'tis time that we depart, for we have seen the whole. So that's the description of Satan that we get, and it's honestly pretty quick, all things considered. The encounter with Ulysses was like 3 pages long. This is a page. And this is supposed to be like sort of the climax of the Inferno. But it's remarkably short. But we see all that we need to see. And we get the sense that it's short because Dante couldn't bear to speak about it. It was so bad that he told us that himself. He's like, in the lines that my mom first read, when he says, reader, I hardly dared to speak of this, or what fear I set these words into verse. So we get this sense that Dante doesn't want to talk about this. It's so bad he doesn't want to talk about it. But that's what we see in Satan. I don't know if anybody else has anything else about the description of Satan or in 34. I would encourage you to go back and read 34, thinking about all of this this is the pit. This is meant to be the opposite of heaven. And so keeping that in your imagination, sort of rereading and trying to think about what is this poetically trying to illustrate. It's an exercise worth doing and reading many times over. It's something to steer away from and avoid. But I don't know if anybody else had any things about the encounter with Satan they found particularly striking. I just have one more point to make before we wrap up class, but wanted to see this because this is an important canto. Obviously, it's the last canto. Didn't know if anybody had any points here that they thought were noteworthy. Desmond.
Sorry. I guess you already mentioned it, I guess, in the whole class, but I was surprised that it was all nice when I first read it too, because I was thinking it was going to be like flames, like.
Yeah.
Burn
We
in
already
hell.
said that, but yeah.
Yeah, so the after this encounter with Satan, so then this is when they start to make their way back up to the light. So after they past Satan, they go through the center of the earth. And this, you have to think about this in a strange way. What they find out is that think about gravity, right? If you go all the way to the center, you're like going downward, but then after you pass through the center, you start to go upward again in a weird sort of way, right? So it's like once you get to the center of Earth, you're now ascending to the surface again. So that's what's happening here at the end of the Inferno, is they pass through the center of the Earth, even though they're going the same direction, which is strange. That's what's strange. They're going the same direction, but because they pass through the center, they're now ascending. They're no longer descending. And so this is where the idea of like the path through paradise runs through hell. You can think about something like that, because that's literally what's happening here.
Interstellar.
Yeah. Shano hasn't seen Interstellar.
Okay.
Okay. Yeah, Desmond.
I was thinking of Alice in Wonderland, which in the cartoon when she went through the hole, then all of a sudden she like flipped upside down. Like
exactly. Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
No, can I back up just a second?
No.
Just because. Oh, no, sorry.
I'm kidding.
Oh no, just because I found this fascinating, maybe someone else would. When you're talking about Satan, it talks about, of course, the 3 people he's eating, but then it's like he's flapping, raised 3 gales, reduced it all to ice with his 6 eyes. He wept 3 chins. They were put, flesh crushes flax. So there were 3. He put to such great pain. One thing, and this is my second time through this. So what's amazing is you get layers, but maybe for people, it might be interesting to consider that whole Trinity thing over and over through the whole canto, all of it. There's 3, 6, and 9 coming through, different. 3 is huge throughout the poem. It's really quite fascinating when you start paying attention, like there was 3 sounds at the beginning, 3 ladies assist, 3 guys, 3 apostles, 9 levels of hell. He's talking about 6 eyes on Satan, all as a, God being a 3-part person. I mean, the more you get into this stuff, the more it blows your mind, kind of thing. What, the layers, I feel like we're just barely scratching the surface, but I don't know. It truly is an amazing poem because there's so much depth that it's hard to even comprehend.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot like Plato in that regard, to be honest, where it's like we've been studying Plato for thousands of years, and there's still sort of like musically, there's such a reverence for like sacred geometry, like sacred geometry and music and the harmony of the spheres. There are so many layers that required sort of like a classical education on classical education. So it's like beauty begetting beauty and layering on top of each other in this beautiful way. And then Dante is something like the pinnacle of it, sort of in sort of the medieval times. And then from Dante onward, we sort of start to lose touch a little bit with sort of our classical foundations. And so I do think Dante represents something like sort of the height of classical roots, like what the art that can be created with very firm and deep classical roots, which is part of the reason I think it's so beautiful. And obviously we still study it today. I'm going, for those of you that don't know, I'm going to a conference in Florida next week called Reclaiming the Cosmic Image. And this guy named Jonathan Pageau, Symbolic World is the name of his podcast. But Reclaiming the Cosmic Image, obviously when I hear that as the title, I immediately go to Dante's comedy and this idea of like just viewing the world hierarchically. I'm not saying we have to think exactly what Dante thought about who's in hell and what hell looks like or what it even is, but it's this idea of like viewing life hierarchically in terms of what we value and what we place at the highest versus flattening everything. I think that's what's meant by reclaiming the cosmic image, is putting things, again, sort of in their proper order instead of like this. So I'm really interested to see where that goes next week. But where we'll end this class is, if you're familiar with my 2 books, you might get a sense for the inspiration of the title at the end of the books. So after the pastor Satan, they go through, like Desmond said, Alice in Wonderland, do a little flippy floppy, gravity turns, they start their ascent, and what do they find? A little rushing stream that courses down. This is lines 130 to 139. I have them in an outline, so I'll read them. And so again, we have to think about it. Hell at bottom is frozen. So as they start to ascend, that frozen lake starts to melt as they progress toward Mount Purgatory. So this is line 130, I believe. A little rushing stream that courses down a hollow it has eaten in a rock, taking a winding way with easy slope. Upon this hidden path, my guide and I entered to go back to the world of light. And without any care to rest at ease, he first and I behind, we climbed so high that through a small round opening I saw some of the turning beauties of the sky, and we came out to see once more the stars. So stars is how he ends the Inferno. It is also how he ends Purgatorio and Paradiso. So there's something here. Again, he's paying homage to Plato. So Plato thought that the stars were our guides. So there's homage here being paid when Dante says at the end of each of these journeys, there's a glancing at the stars as something that points us home. So again, the idea of reclaiming the cosmic image is like seeing the world as if we are not looking out at the stars, but up at the stars. So even if this isn't literally true, is the idea of like the stars, what they represent is something higher, light, closer to the divine. And so how the cosmic image would see that, how Dante would see that, is something like if the stars are the direct descendants, first generation descendants of God, and we're, now whatever, the 100th generation or 1000th generation. This idea that they're sort of closer to that, the divine essence. Even if not literally, sort of metaphorically and figuratively, this pointing back up to the stars is a reorienting sort of to the divine based on things we can physically see. If we can't see God, the stars are sort of represent something of God that we can see. So in looking at the stars, that's what Dante is talking about. C.S. Lewis has a great book called On the Discarded Image, where he advocates, I have a Substack post about it if you're interested in reading it, but he advocates for, if you're interested in understanding what it would be like to view the world as a medieval man, you must go outside under the stars and imagine yourself looking up at them instead of out into the universe. You're not looking out in the earth. Imagine the earth at the bottom of the universe, and then when you look up at the stars, you see the stars with the understanding that they're just higher, and then beyond that is where God is. And so it's like we can learn something of sort of what's beyond the highest thing that we can see. So that's where we end the Inferno. Those are sort of my closing thoughts. I don't know if TBD. I'll send out an email to get a pulse on whether folks want to just like reconvene and talk about certain portions of it without me lecturing or talking. It just like as a final sort of reflection, to go back through and any points that I didn't address that were just burning in your heart, or any questions that you really wanted to talk about. Or I know like Shanoa a few times has been reading a different translation, and so there's been a few really cool times where we'd have conversations afterward where she's like, oh, and in my translation it says this, and it opens up a totally different insight. So I think I might schedule one more class for next week, but I'll talk to people and see if they want to do that, where we can kind of talk about some of those things, so they don't get lost. And while your mind is on it, we can. Yes, Marissa.
Sorry again. There's the Cosmos guy. What is it? Neil deGrasse Tyson?
Yeah.
There's a video. He was on a late night show, and they asked him like what his biggest fear was, And he said that the knowledge that the stars change basically, like as the centuries go on. So the sky that we're looking at right now is not the same sky that people like, 100 or thousands of years ago looked at. And so it kind of goes to your point where like the stars are closer to God, but then even after like maybe once, after the century passes or 1,000 years passes, like the stars move even closer to God and we can't even see them. So now they're like with God. Just kind of interesting.
Yeah. No, so this is something that Plato talks about. I think you're right. But we can think about it, right? In the context of stars take a lot longer to change and die than we do. And so there is this ascension process of they are not timeless, but they are more timeless than we are. And so that is why stars represent sort of this upward motion toward God, who is the eternal, who is sort of the thing that never changes, is totally timeless. And so that's part of the reason that stars, it's certainly, I mean, it's also true, but like to the medieval mind, they had no idea. Like they didn't, as far as they were concerned, stars they did last forever. Maybe that's not entirely true, but we certainly know more sort of actually scientifically about the birth and death of stars. But all of that to say is it just makes sense hierarchically if we think about things as it goes from the most transient, the most fleeting, to the most unchanging. And so in looking at the stars, it is a reorientation to not things of this world that are fleeting and will change, but to the changeless and eternal. And so that's sort of this process of redirecting our attention towards those things and contemplating those things and sort of pinging them as guides to point us in the right direction. Great point, though. I like it. Well done. All right. Yes, Mom, you got something.
Well, just really quick, because I think is relevant. We're in the Easter season. If I recall, I don't know if it was what canto. It was like, the Day of Hope. It was the Saturday, when Jesus was on the cross. And then when they come out, isn't it Easter morning that they come out and see the stars? If I remember right, it's Easter morning. And so
I don't
they get
know.
a
I'd have to
glimpse of
go
him.
back and look at the beginning of
Yeah.
Purgatory. That sounds right, though.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure. And C.S. Lewis has a quote that talks about that being Easter morning, and you go further up and further into the love of God. At this point, they're going further up and further into the love of God as they, come out of hell on Easter morning, and there's the hope, right?
Well, there is it comes up again in these contos we talked about today. I didn't mention it, but there was another example of sort of the powerlessness of hell that happened in these cantos if you read them, which it hyperlinks us back to the harrowing of hell, both the poem and the act of when Jesus dies, gets crucified, descends to hell, and then sort of liberates the people, creates the bridge from hell to heaven. So that is the harrowing, that's the harrowing of hell that happens. And so I think what Dante is mirroring is something like he is in the Inferno during the same time of year that Christ is supposed to have sort of descended into hell himself. So there is a parallel tracks that are happening here. And I think that's what's going on. So I think you're right, Mom. And it is, yeah. I mean, obviously we're in sort of Easter season now, so it's appropriate to be thinking about these things and reflecting on them. But all right, I will email all of you to get your thoughts. If you have any feedback, things you liked, things you didn't like, things you would want done differently in the next version of this, or books you would like to do, this is something I want to do a lot more of. And so I want to get better at it. And obviously you guys are sort of a V1 of this. And so to the extent I can keep my main crew and we can sort of build this thing together, that would be amazing. But you guys are busy, you have your lives of your own. So no harm, no foul. I appreciate all of you taking the time and the interest to do this. So with that, I am already late for sushi, so I gotta get rolling. But
Get rolling like sushi.
yeah, yeah, that's right. Got it. I got dad jokes. I don't even know it. Yeah, thank you guys so much. Seriously, this has been awesome. And I look forward to many more to come. Have a great
No,
rest
thank
of your
you.
Monday, everybody.
See
Bye,
ya.
everybody.
See you.